The Hebrew Israelites, their schools, or their teachings are considered to be a modern spiritual awakening among people, particularly African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans who live in the Americas, the Western Hemisphere, who claim to be the descendants of the ancient Israelites. The African Americans claim to be the descendants or children of the Jews who were driven out of the ancient city of Israel, Jerusalem, in 70 AD by the Roman Empire during the Roman-Jewish Wars. The Roman-Jewish Wars lasted for 70 years, from the year 66 to 135 AD. The Romans emerged victorious, which led to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and widespread destruction in Judea, the homeland of the Jews. And this led to the diaspora or dispersion of the survivors throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. In this time, in the first century, Egypt and North Africa was home to 1 million Jews, to over 1 million Jews. In the time of King Solomon, 1,000 years earlier, Israel was a maritime power with a great navy and held colonies across the Mediterranean, including Spain and North Africa. And there were also journeys by ships to the coast of West Africa by the navy of King Solomon, and to places as far away as the Americas and the Western Hemisphere. There are also records of Solomon Navy traveling to the South China Sea before the modern Chinese population inhabited those lands. In the Hebrew awakening, the indigenous Americans, who are now called Indians and Latinos and Hispanics, are descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, who were taken into captivity by the Assyrian Empire around the year 720 BC. In the book of 2nd Esdras, the 10 tribes are recorded as leaving the Assyrian Empire in the Middle East and relocating to another region where mankind never dwelt or lived, a region known as Azareth, the Americas, or the Western Hemisphere, but known to the Greeks and Romans as Perosi, which literally means beside the Ecomene, or the inhabited world. The world of the Greco-Roman Empire, which included Europe, Asia, and Africa, was called the Ecumene. And the Americas was across the Atlantic Ocean from Europe, Asia, and Africa, the Ecumene, or the inhabited world. There is also a Jewish national awakening, or Zionist movement. In the 19th and 20th centuries, a revival of Jewish national identity, leading to the modern Zionist movement and the establishment of Israel, or the State of Israel, in 1948. These two awakenings, the Hebrew awakening and the Jewish national awakening, or Zionist movement, at times shared similar goals and joined together to share their worldview of a Israel and of a Jerusalem liberated from the forces of the Gentiles or non-Israelite peoples. The Great Awakening of the Hebrews, of the Hebrew Israelites. Let's take a deeper dive into the history of the recognition of the African American and Caribbean descendants of the Atlantic slave trade, who claim to be Jews or members of the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. This recognition was declared before the United Nations in the year 1975 by a United States ambassador before a United Nations General Assembly. In his speech before the General Assembly of the United Nations, this ambassador declared that the state of Israel was composed of Jews from around the world, including Black Jews. This history is recorded in the Department of State Selected Documents number 3, dated 1975, from the Bureau of Public Affairs Office of Media Services. U.S. International Energy Policy, October 1973 to November 1975. This document reveals that the Zionist movement was the driving ideological and political force behind the founding of the State of Israel in 1948. Zionism is a nationalist movement that emerged in the late 19th century with the goal of establishing a Jewish homeland in the historical land of Israel, then part of the Ottoman Empire and later under British control. In the year 1897, the First Zionist Congress, held in Basel, Switzerland, led by Theodor Herzl, he famously said in Basel, "I founded the Jewish state." In the year 1917, the Balfour Declaration, Britain expressed support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. In the 1920s through the 1940s, there were waves of Jewish immigration to Palestine. There were development of settlements, institutions like the Jewish Agency, and the revival of Hebrew as a spoken language. In the year 1947, the United Nations passed Resolution 181, recommending the partition of Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. May 14th, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, head of the Jewish Agency, declared the independence of the State of Israel. The declaration referenced the historical connection of the Jewish people to the land and cited the legitimacy granted by international recognition in the United Nations partition plan. Jews from different regions were participants in the Zionist program. The United Nations, New York City. The year is 1975. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, the Israelite prophet Isaiah, chapter 2, verse 4. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. In the book of the Hebrew prophet Micah, the Hebrew Israelite prophet Micah, chapter 4, verse 3, is almost identical. And he shall judge among many people, and rebuke strong nations afar off. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. The meaning and symbolism behind the monument: swords to plowshares. Tools of war become tools of agriculture, a transformation from violence to sustenance and peace. The economies of the world are sustained by war, military industrial complex. They haven't developed a model or technology for the world to thrive in a world without war. This is the goal that cannot be attained without divine intervention. Only in the kingdom of God can this be established. Spears into pruning hooks, weapons or technology become instruments for cultivating life. In the future kingdom of heaven on earth, all wars shall come to an end. Technology and knowledge to cultivate life, not death. Weapons of war shall be destroyed. This vision is often interpreted messianically or end times, symbolizing a future age of universal peace under God's rule. The United Nations is promoting a world where the Messiah, or the Son of God, will establish a Eden or paradise on earth. Wars will not end until the kingdom of heaven is established on earth. Secular humanist writers call this place N-era utopia, which means nowhere or place, because this has not been achieved yet. Let us beat swords into plowshares. Let us beat swords into plowshares is a bronze sculpture by artist Evgeny Vukotic, 1908 to 1974. Vukotic was an esteemed Soviet sculptor and artist, well known for his heroic monuments. In 1959, he was given the People's Artist of the USSR Award. The sculpture depicts the figure of a man holding a hammer aloft in one hand and a sword in the other hand, hammering the sword into a plowshare, a tool to till land for crops. This action symbolizes man's desire to put an end to war and transform tools of destruction into tools to benefit mankind. The book of Isaiah contains the following passage: They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. The sculpture was gifted to the United Nations by the USSR on December 4th, 1959. It was presented on behalf of the Soviet delegation by Vasily V. Kuznetsov, first Deputy Foreign Minister of the USSR, to Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, who accepted the sculpture on behalf of the United Nations, the donor region, Eastern European Group, the donor, USSR. Donor, USSR. Classification, sculpture. Materials, bronze, medium, cast bronze and granite pedestal. Location, building, exterior ground of the United Nations. Donation date, December 4th, 1959. Artist or maker, Evgeny Vuchitek. United Nations Headquarters, November 10th, 1975. The United Nations General Assembly. The United States Ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Daniel P. Moynihan. Israel was a multiracial melting pot, including black Jews, brown Jews, white Jews, Jews from the Orient, and Jews from the West. A quote by Daniel P. Moynihan, the United States representative to the United Nations, November 10th, 1975. The State of Israel. The melting pot of the State of Israel. Black Jews, brown Jews, white Jews, Oriental Jews, and Western Jews. Universal Center for Renovation presents historical and biblical Israelites. This video is strictly for educational purposes and commentary. This video is a biblical and secular historical literature. So, enjoy. Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, March 16th, 1927 to March 26, 2003, was an American politician, diplomat, and social scientist. A member of the Democratic Party, he represented New York in the United States Senate from 1977 until 2001. After serving as an advisor to President Richard Nixon and as the United States ambassador to India and to the United Nations. Born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Moynihan moved at a young age to New York City following a stint in the Navy. He earned a PhD in history from Tufts University. He worked on the staff of New York Governor W. Averell Harriman. before joining President John F. Kennedy's administration in 1961. He served as an Assistant Secretary of Labor under President Kennedy and President Lyndon B. Johnson, devoting much of his time to the war on poverty. In 1965, he published the controversial Moynihan Report on Black Poverty. Moynihan left the Johnson administration in 1965 and became a professor at Harvard University. In 1969, he accepted Nixon's offer to serve as an assistant to the president for domestic policy, and he was elevated to the position of counselor to the president later that year. He left the administration at the end of 1970 and accepted appointment as United States Ambassador to India in 1973. He accepted President Gerald Ford's appointment to the position of United States Ambassador to the United Nations in 1975, holding that position until early 1976. Later that year, he won election to the Senate. In June 1975, Moynihan accepted his third offer to serve as United States Ambassador to the United Nations, a position including a rotation as President of the United Nations Security Council that he would only hold until February 1976. Under President Gerald Ford, Ambassador Moynihan took a hardline anti-communist stance in line with the agenda of the White House at the time. He was also a strong supporter of Israel, condemning the UN Resolution 3379, which declared Zionism to be a form of racism. The American public responded enthusiastically to his moral outrage over the resolution. His condemnation of the Zionism is racism resolution brought him celebrity status and helped him win a U.S. Senate seat a year later. Moynihan opposed the resolution because he thought it was completely false and perverse. The United Nations General Assembly adopted Resolution 3379 in 1975, which declared that Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. This was an extremely controversial resolution and was later revoked in 1991 via Resolution 46/86. But the reasons behind its original passage are complex and rooted in global politics, anti-colonialism movements, and Cold War alignments. Here's a breakdown of why the UN took that position at the time. Number one, decolonization and global South solidarity. The 1960s and 70s were decades of mass decolonization across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Newly independent countries, many of which had suffered under European colonialism, were now voting members in the UN. These nations often saw Zionism, the movement to establish a Jewish state in historic Palestine, as a settler colonial project, akin to apartheid in South Africa or European colonialism in Africa. For them, the displacement of Palestinians in 1948, the Nakba, and the ongoing Israeli occupation after 1967 made Zionism look like ethnic nationalism built on exclusion. To many in the global South, Zionism was seen not simply as Jewish self determination, but as racialized nationalism that displaced another people. Number two, Cold War geopolitics and Soviet influence. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union aligned with Arab and anti-colonial states, positioning itself as an ally of the Palestinians. The US was a close ally of Israel, so opposing Zionism became a proxy for opposing Western imperialism. The Soviet bloc pushed hard to frame Zionism as a form of racism, partly out of ideology, partly as political leverage. The text of the resolution 3379 determines that Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. It passed with 72 votes in favor, 35 against, and 32 abstentions. Notably, Western nations, including the US, Canada, most of Europe, opposed it, while Arab states, the Soviet bloc, and many decolonized nations supported it. The reaction from Israel and the US. Israel and Jewish communities worldwide condemned the resolution as anti Semitic, claiming it denied Jews the right to self determination. U.S. Ambassador to the UN at the time, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, fiercely opposed it, saying the United States does not acknowledge, it will not abide by, it will never acquiesce in this infamous act. Why it was revoked in 1991. After the Cold War, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and growing efforts toward Middle East peace talks, the resolution became a political obstacle. As part of the conditions for the Madrid Peace Conference, the UN rescinded Resolution 3379 with Resolution 46/86 in 1991. The summary of this history: the UN equated Zionism with racism in 1975 because many nations viewed it through the lens of colonialism, ethnic nationalism, and racial exclusion. It aligned with Soviet and anti imperialist ideologies. It was a form of solidarity with the Palestinian struggle, seen as another front in the global fight against racism and colonialism. But this framing remains deeply controversial. For many Jews, Zionism is a liberation movement, not racism. For others, especially Palestinians and some decolonial thinkers, Zionism resulted in racialized displacement. Certainly, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan's staunch defense of Israel as a non-racial state in response to the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3379, which declared Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination, is well documented in the congressional record. A shadow over Palestine. The imperial life of race in America by Keith P. Feldman is a scholarly examination of how U.S. racial ideologies and imperial politics intersect with the Israeli Palestinian conflict. Published in 2015, the book explores the period from 1960 to 1985, analyzing how representations of Israel and Palestine influenced American racial and imperial narratives. Ambassador Daniel Patrick Moynihan's impassioned response to the United Nations General Assembly's adoption of Resolution 3379, declaring Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination, is a pivotal moment in diplomatic history. Delivered on November 10th, 1975, his speech is widely regarded as a defining act of moral clarity and political courage. In his General Assembly speech, Moynihan relied on Webster's Third New International Dictionary for conceptually clarity, tacitly delinking racism from broader historical analysis by focusing instead on semantics. The dictionary, Moynihan argued, defined racism as the assumption that traits and capacities are determined by biological race and that races differ decisively from one another. This assumption is usually coupled with a belief in the inherent superiority of a particular race and its right to domination over others. Moynihan used the latter part of the definition to argue against the claim that Jews are a particular race. Moynihan claimed that Zionism, as a strictly religious and political movement, never operated under such assumptions. That Jews are a race was invented not by Jews, but by those who hated Jews. It was a contemptible idea at the beginning, and no civilized person would be associated with it. Zionism was rather a part of an upsurge in national consciousness and aspiration, a national liberation movement. The anti-Zionist resolution, published several months later in Foreign Affairs. According to this line of thinking, Zionism was exceptional in its open, pluralistic ideology, in contrast to the more narrow nationalism emanating from the Third World. Zionism was not a movement of persons connected by historical membership in a genetic pool. To the contrary, Zionists defined themselves merely as Jews and declared to be Jewish anyone born of a Jewish mother, or, and this is the absolutely crucial fact, anyone who converted to Judaism. Israel was a multi-racial and multi-religious melting pot whose polity was drawn from a range of racial stocks, including black Jews, brown Jews, white Jews, Jews from the Orient, and Jews from the West. While it was true that most such persons could be said to have been born Jews, Moynihan concedes there are many Jews who are converts. This is the excerpts from the speech in the official State Department document. The Department of State selected documents. Number 3, dated 1975, from the Bureau of Public Affairs, Office of Media Services, U.S. International Energy Policy, October 1973 to November 1975. Excerpts from a statement by Ambassador Daniel P. Moynihan, U.S. Representative to the United Nations, in opposition to the resolution equating Zionism with racism. New York, November 10th, 1975. The word racism is a creation of the English language and relatively new to it. It is not, for instance, to be found in the Oxford English Dictionary. The term derives from relatively new doctrines, all of them discredited, concerning the human population of the world, to the effect that there are significant biological differences among clearly identifiable groups, and that these differences establish and affect different levels of humanity. Racism, as defined by Webster's Third New International Dictionary, is the assumption that traits and capacities are determined by biological race, and that races differ decisively from one another. It further involves a belief in the inherent superiority of a particular race and its right to domination over others. This meaning is clear. It is equally clear that this assumption, this belief, has always been altogether alien to the political and religious movement known as Zionism. A strictly political movement, Zionism was established only in 1897, although there is a clearly legitimate sense in which its origins are indeed ancient. For example, many branches of Christianity have always held that, from the standpoint of the biblical prophets, Israel would be reborn one day. But the modern Zionist movement arose in Europe in the context of a general upsurge of national consciousness and aspiration that overtook most other people of Central and Eastern Europe after 1848, and that in time spread to all of Africa and Asia. The state of Israel, which in time was the creation of the Zionist movement, has been extraordinary in nothing so much as the range of racial stocks from which it has drawn its citizenry. There are black Jews, brown Jews, white Jews, Jews from the Orient, and Jews from the West. Most such persons could be said to have been born Jews, just as most Presbyterians and most Hindus are born to their faith. But there are many Jews who are converts, with a consistency in the matter which surely attests to the importance of this issue, to that religious and political culture. Israelis courts have held that a Jew who converts to another religion is no longer a Jew. Eventually, in time, the black Jews of America, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, opened up schools. The Hebrew awakening extended a hand of brotherhood to the original indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, which included the Latinos and North American Indians, the lost tribes of Israel. From North America, including Canada, the islands of the Caribbean, Mexico, Central and South America, all the way down to the tip of Argentina, many eagerly received the good news of the gospel. Once the tents of Judah were secured, the calling went out to the Israelites, the ones who were called the Gentile strangers in America, Africa, Asia, Central Asia, the Pacific Islands, and in Europe, among the British, Scots, Irish, Welsh, Portuguese, Spanish, Greeks, Italians, French, Germans, Russians, and other scattered Israelites in Europe, among the Japanese, Indians, Arabs, Israelis, Chinese, Koreans, Palestinians, etc. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 to 5. And the name of the Lord in ancient Hebrew is Yahweh. It means he exists. And the name of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, in the Hebrew, it's Yahushai, Joshua, and Christ means the anointed king. Yahushai, Joshua, the anointed king of Israel. And Jesus, or Joshua, Yahushai, means he saves.